Draco's laughter shattered the silence like a whip across a war drum. The Nasat commander's degrading words about humans and their elite soldiers sliced into Jeffrey Stevens's ears, drawing shades of scarlet up the young man's cheeks. The hiss of pressure equalizing in the spacecraft airlock rang in the 22-year-old Marine's ears as he stepped foot on the alien planet for the first time. His hand reached up, fingers brushing the American flag adorned on his flight suit, a constant reminder of who and what he represented. Jeffrey swallowed hard, his heart pounding against his ribcage. The fierce hope and determination of Earth rode on his shoulders. He was one of the first humans to ever visit the Nasat homeworld. The first soldier entrusted with proving humanity deserved a place among the stars. All around him, foreign sounds and smells assaulted his senses. Strange spires twisted into burnt skies above his head. Dozens of eyes, some glittering like gemstones, others blinking on stalks, scrutinized him from scaly alien faces. Her towering figure stepped forward, resplendent in military regalia, glinting with medals and insignia. The creature's shark-like head split into rows of razor teeth. Draco, High Commander of the Nasat forces. "So this is what the humans send as their elite soldier?" The alien sneered in perfect English. "I would not trust this whelp to polish my boots." Raucous laughter pealed through the crowd of dignitaries, while red-hot humiliation painted Jeffrey's face. A tide of rage and wounded pride rose up in his chest, biting words burning at the back of his throat. But he remained silent. He had a job to do. Intergalactic relations between humanity and the Nasat hung in the balance. If Jeffrey wanted to earn the aliens' respect, he would have to do it through strength and valor. And with the announcement of upcoming joint military exercises, he would have his chance to prove himself and all of humanity on the field of battle. Until then, he would endure Draco's taunts with patience and fortitude. The Nasat would soon learn the true mettle of Earth's defenders. The morning of the joint training exercise dawned, the alien sun casting an eerie glow across the barren landscape. Jeffrey reported to the designated training grounds, his pulse quickening as he spotted the group of waiting Nasat soldiers. Among them stood Draco, his shark-like visage twisted into a sneer. A grizzled Nasat veteran stepped forward, introducing himself as Korax, the training instructor. He explained the grueling regimen, a test of physical fitness, combat skills, tactical knowledge, and mental resilience under pressure. Jeffrey listened intently, his muscles tensing with anticipation. Draco leaned towards another Nasat soldier, his voice carrying across the grounds. "Watch closely, this will be entertaining." Jeffrey gritted his teeth, determined to prove the arrogant commander wrong. The first challenge, a punishing 20-kilometer run in full gear. The Nasat soldiers surged ahead, their powerful legs propelling them forward at breakneck speeds. Jeffrey, however, maintained a steady pace, his breath controlled and measured. At the 10-kilometer mark, the Nasat began to falter. Their initial burst of speed had taken its toll, and they struggled to maintain their lead. Jeffrey seized the opportunity, overtaking them one by one until only Draco remained ahead. In the final kilometer, Jeffrey pushed himself to the limit. His lungs burned and his legs screamed in protest, but he refused to yield. With a final burst of speed, he overtook an exhausted and shocked Draco, crossing the finish line in first place. Next came the obstacle course, a twisted maze of challenges designed to test speed, strength, agility, and problem-solving. Jeffrey, well-versed in similar training, quickly identified the optimal route. He navigated the obstacles with fluid grace, his smaller human frame proving advantageous in the tight spaces. The Nasat, however, struggled. Their larger physiques became hindrances, and they grappled with the unfamiliar human-designed elements. Jeffrey completed the course in record time, leaving Draco and the others staring in disbelief. As the day progressed, Jeffrey consistently outperformed the Nasat in marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and tactical simulations. The effectiveness of his human training shone through, much to the frustration and humiliation of Draco. Tension reached a boiling point. Draco, his pride wounded, demanded a final one-on-one physical fight with Jeffrey to reassert Nasat dominance. Korax hesitated, but ultimately allowed it, stating that the fight would continue until one party submitted. Jeffrey knew this was his moment, a chance to silence Draco's insults and earn the respect he and humanity deserved. He stepped forward, meeting Draco's gaze with unwavering determination. The two adversaries circled each other, their bodies coiled with tension. Draco lunged first, his razor-sharp claws slicing through the air. Jeffrey dodged, countering with a swift jab to Draco's exposed flank. They traded blows, each seeking to exploit the other's weaknesses. Draco's strength was formidable, but Jeffrey's agility and precision kept him in the fight. The Nasat soldiers watched, their initial jeers fading into stunned silence as the human held his own against their commander. Sweat poured down Jeffrey's face, mingling with the dust and grime of the battlefield. His muscles burned with exertion, but he pushed through the pain. He could not, would not, fail. In a final desperate gambit, Draco charged forward, seeking to overwhelm Jeffrey with sheer force. But Jeffrey was ready. He sidestepped the attack, using Draco's own momentum against him. With a deft maneuver, Jeffrey locked Draco's arm behind his back, driving the Nasat commander to his knees. "Yield!" Jeffrey demanded, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. Draco struggled, his pride warring with the reality of his defeat. But as Jeffrey's grip tightened, the Nasat commander had no choice. "I yield," he ground out, the words bitter on his tongue. Jeffrey released his hold, stepping back as Draco rose to his feet. The Nasat soldiers stood in stunned silence, their perceptions of human capabilities shattered in the face of Jeffrey's victory. Korax approached, his expression unreadable. "Impressive, human. You have proven yourself a worthy adversary." He turned to the gathered Nasat soldiers. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Never underestimate your opponent, no matter their species." Jeffrey nodded, his chest heaving with exertion. He had done it. He had shown the Nasat the true mettle of Earth's defenders, but he knew this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. As he stood there, surrounded by the alien landscape and the watchful gazes of the Nasat, Jeffrey felt a surge of pride. Pride in himself, in his training, and in the indomitable spirit of humanity. They had taken their first steps among the stars, and they would not be found wanting. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Jeffrey Stevens and all those who followed in his footsteps would face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage, determination, and the unwavering belief in the strength of the human spirit. Jeffrey and Draco stepped into the combat circle, a ring of Nasat and human onlookers forming around them. Draco loomed over the human, his scaly hide bulging with coiled muscles as he dropped into a wide, fighting crouch. Jeffrey appeared dwarfed by comparison, but his posture was relaxed and balanced, his eyes locked on his opponent. With an ear-splitting roar, Draco surged forward, clawed hands outstretched to grapple and crush. Jeffrey waited until the last second, then pivoted smoothly to the side. The Nasat's charge met only air as he barreled past. Draco spun around with surprising agility for his size, launching a rapid series of swipes and lunges. Jeffrey bobbed and weaved, deflecting the blows with his forearms and shifting just enough to let them slice past. The human's economy of motion was a stark contrast to Draco's increasingly furious flailing. Snarling in frustration, Draco overextended on a powerful straight punch. Jeffrey slipped beneath it and snapped 2 quick jabs into the Nasat's exposed ribs before skipping back out of range. Draco's breath whooshed out in a pained grunt. The exchange repeated several times, Draco's raw aggression and power negated by Jeffrey's precision and efficiency. It became increasingly apparent that the human's technique was simply more effective. Sensing his moment, Jeffrey ducked under a wild haymaker and shot forward into a double-leg takedown. He caught Draco around the thighs and with a heave drove the massive Nasat to the ground. In a flash, Jeffrey was on Draco's back, one arm snaking around the thick neck, while the other wrenched the Nasat's arm up at a sharp angle. Draco thrashed and bucked, but Jeffrey's grip was locked in. Seconds ticked by until finally Draco slapped the ground in submission. Jeffrey released the hold and rolled away, coming to his feet. He reached a hand down to help Draco up. For a tense moment it seemed Draco might slap the hand away, but begrudgingly he accepted it and allowed himself to be hauled upright. The assembled soldiers stood in stunned silence, the outcome apparently difficult to process. Then Corax stepped forward. "The human is the clear victor," he announced. "His skill is most impressive." Draco shot Corax a venomous look but ground out, "Well fought, human. It seems I underestimated you." Before Jeffrey could respond, Corax spoke again. "In fact, I would test your mettle myself." He shed his outer robe and strode into the ring. A friendly spar to gauge if your victory was a fluke or a true representation of human capability. Jeffrey felt the fatigue of the day weighing on him, but he couldn't refuse this challenge. Not when he had the chance to prove humanity's worth against the Nasat's most respected veteran. "I accept," he said, rolling his shoulders and cracking his neck. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd as the two fighters faced off. There was a sense that this bout would be even more intense, a clash between two seasoned warriors at the peak of their abilities. Jeffrey set his jaw, his eyes meeting Corax's unflinching gaze. No matter the outcome, he would give this fight everything he had, for himself, for his fellow soldiers watching, and for all of humanity. He would show them what humans were made of. Corax shifted his stance, talons flexing against the packed earth. Jeffrey tensed, reading his opponent, waiting for the telltale twitch of muscle that would signal the first strike. The Nasat and human spectators held their collective breath, the air crackling with tension. Then, in a blur of motion, the two combatants clashed in the center of the ring, marking the start of a battle that would be remembered for generations to come. Corax circled Jeffrey with the predatory grace of an apex hunter, his movements fluid and mesmerizing. Jeffrey kept his guard up, eyes locked on his opponent, anticipating the next strike. Suddenly, Corax lunged forward, his clawed fist whistling through the air. Jeffrey parried, the impact sending shockwaves up his arm. He countered with a swift jab, but Corax slipped the punch, retaliating with a knee strike that Jeffrey barely blocked. Back and forth they danced, trading blows in a blinding flurry. Corax's style was like nothing Jeffrey had ever faced, a dizzying blend of sinuous grace and explosive power. It took every ounce of Jeffrey's focus to keep pace. "Pure slowing human," Corax taunted, his voice a rasping snarl. "Do you yield?" Jeffrey gritted his teeth, refusing to rise to the bait. He knew Corax was trying to get inside his head, to provoke a reckless response, but Jeffrey's mental discipline held firm. He let the taunts wash over him, his focus unwavering. As the fight dragged on, fatigue began to take its toll. Jeffrey's muscles burned, his lungs heaved, but he could see Corax was flagging too, his movements losing a fraction of their crispness. It was then that Corax made his move. With a ferocious roar, he launched himself into a spinning aerial kick, a technique Jeffrey had never seen before. For a split second, Jeffrey froze, his mind racing to process this unexpected attack. But his body, honed by years of rigorous training, reacted on instinct. He twisted aside, letting the kick slip past by a hair's breadth. Seizing the opening, Jeffrey caught Corax's leg and wrenched, using the Nasat's own momentum to send him crashing to the ground. Before Corax could recover, Jeffrey was on him, locking him into an inescapable submission hold. Corax thrashed and bucked, but Jeffrey's grip was iron. Finally, with a hiss of frustration, Corax tapped out. As Jeffrey released him and stepped back, Corax rose slowly to his feet. For a long moment he stared at Jeffrey, his expression unreadable. Then, to Jeffrey's surprise, he bowed his head in a gesture of respect. "Well fought, Jeffrey Stevens," Corax said. "I had thought to find you wanting, but you have proven yourself a warrior of skill and spirit. Your human training has served you well." He turned to the assembled Nasat soldiers, his voice ringing out. Let this be a lesson to you all. We have much to learn from our human allies. Their strength lies not just in their bodies, but in their minds and hearts as well. We must not make the mistake of underestimating them again. As the soldiers dispersed, talking excitedly amongst themselves, Draco approached Geoffrey. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of contrition. "Geoffrey," he said, his voice low, "I owe you an apology. My behavior towards you was unworthy. You have shown me the error of my ways." He extended a clawed hand. "I would like to propose a series of joint training sessions between our peoples. I believe we have much to teach each other." Geoffrey clasped Draco's hand, a smile tugging at his lips. "I think that's an excellent idea." As Draco walked away, Geoffrey couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He had proven himself, and in doing so, had opened a door to greater understanding between humans and Nasat. But even as he savored this victory, a flicker of unease stirred in his gut. The challenges he had faced today had been formidable, but somehow he couldn't shake the feeling that they were only the prelude to something much larger, much more dangerous. Something that would test him and all of humanity to their very limits. Geoffrey shook his head, banishing the thought. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it as he always had, with courage, determination, and an unwavering faith in the strength of the human spirit. He turned and strode off the training ground, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The urgent summons jolted Geoffrey from his post-training reverie. He strode into the briefing room, the hum of hushed conversations fading as he entered. His superiors, their faces grim, stood alongside the Nasat military leaders. The air crackled with tension. "We have a situation," his commanding officer began, his voice tight. "A rogue Nasat faction has attacked the joint research facility on Theron's moon. They're after the prototype technology and sensitive data stored there. If they get their hands on it—" He didn't need to finish. The implications hung heavy in the air. Geoffrey's mind raced, already formulating strategies and contingencies. "You'll lead a mixed strike team to retake the facility," the officer continued. "Human and Nasat special forces. You'll need to work together, fast and smart. The stakes couldn't be higher." Geoffrey nodded, his jaw set. As the briefing delved into specifics, entry points, enemy numbers, facility layout, he absorbed every detail, committing them to memory. Then a familiar figure caught his eye, Draco standing among the Nasat contingent. Their gazes met, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Whatever their past differences, they were in this together now. The team assembled in the hangar, a motley assortment of humans and Nasat, each eyeing the other with wary appraisal. Geoffrey wasted no time. "Listen up," he barked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I know this is new for all of us. Working together, different species, different methods. But none of that matters now. Out there, we're one unit with one mission. We watch each other's backs, we adapt, we communicate. Anything less and we fail, understood?" Nods and grunts of assent. It was a start. As they geared up, checking weapons and equipment, Geoffrey moved among them, offering guidance, clarifying roles, mediating disputes. He could feel the barriers starting to erode, a tentative camaraderie taking root. Then they were in the dropship, hurtling towards the moon's surface, the weight of the mission bearing down on them all. Geoffrey closed his eyes, visualizing the facility, the potential threats, the critical objectives. The ship shuddered as it breached the atmosphere. Geoffrey's eyes snapped open. It was time. They hit the ground running, fanning out into formation as they approached the facility's perimeter. Eerie silence greeted them, the stillness belying the danger lurking within. Then all hell broke loose. Blaster fire erupted from the shadows, crimson bolts searing the air. The team scattered, seeking cover even as they returned fire. Geoffrey barked orders, directing his forces to key positions. They pushed forward, leapfrogging from cover to cover, the Nasat's superior strength and resilience complementing the humans' agility and precision. Slowly, Methodically, they beat back the defenders. But as they breached the facility's inner sanctum, the true scale of the threat became clear. It wasn't just a raid, it was a conspiracy, a bid for power that could shatter the fragile peace between their species. Jeffrey gritted his teeth. They were the last line of defense. Failure was not an option. He glanced at Draco, at the determined faces of his team, human and Nasat alike. They would stand together, fight together, and if necessary, die together. For the Alliance, for their worlds, for the future. With a rallying cry, Jeffrey led the charge into the heart of the complex, into the crucible that would forge the fate of galaxies. Jeffrey's team breached the control room in a hail of blaster fire. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks as the strike force clashed with Zarus's elite guard in brutal close-quarters combat. Jeffrey spotted Zarus amid the chaos, barking orders as he clutched a strange, glowing artifact. "Zarus," Jeffrey roared over the din of battle, "surrender the Nexus, it's over." Zarus whirled to face him, eyes blazing with fanatical fervor. "You're too late, human. The seeds of conflict are already sown. Your alliance will crumble, and from the ashes I will build a new order." With a mad cackle, Zarus bolted for the exit, the Nexus pulsing in his grasp. Jeffrey surged after him, dodging energy bolts and leaping over fallen bodies. He chased Zarus through twisting corridors, the sounds of battle fading behind them. They burst into the hangar bay, Zarus racing for a waiting shuttle. Jeffrey raised his blaster. "Stop right there!" Zarus spun to face him, holding up the Nexus like a talisman. "You still don't understand, do you? I've seen into the minds of your leaders and the Nasats. I've planted the seeds of mistrust and fear. Even if you stop me here, war is coming. It's inevitable." Jeffrey's finger tightened on the trigger, but he hesitated. If what Zarus said was true, killing him wouldn't be enough. He had to get that artifact. In a flash, Jeffrey lunged, tackling Zarus to the ground. They grappled for the Nexus, rolling across the hangar floor. The orb began to glow brighter, thrumming with power. Suddenly, Jeffrey's mind exploded with sensation. He felt Zarus's thoughts, his memories, his twisted ambitions, and he felt Zarus in his own mind, clawing at his deepest fears and doubts. They were locked in a battle of wills, their minds intertwined through the Nexus. Jeffrey gritted his teeth, pushing back against Zarus's dark influence. He focused on his training, his duty, the bonds of trust he'd forged with his team. "Hyus will not win," Jeffrey ground out, his mental voice echoing through the Nexus's psychic landscape. In the physical world, the rest of the strike team burst into the hangar, skidding to a halt at the sight of Jeffrey and Zarus locked in their eerie, motionless struggle. Draco started forward, but Corax held him back. "We can't interfere," the old warrior said grimly. "This battle is beyond us now." Inside the Nexus, Jeffrey rallied his strength for a final push. He drew upon every ounce of his human spirit, the tenacity, the ingenuity, the sheer stubborn refusal to yield. With a roar that shook the foundations of the psychic realm, Jeffrey surged forward, shattering Zarus's hold on his mind. The rogue Nasat commander reeled back, his mental defenses crumbling. In that moment of vulnerability, Jeffrey seized control of the Nexus. Power surged through him, raw and unfettered. With a thought, he severed Zarus's connection to the artifact, casting him out of the psychic network. Zarus convulsed, then slumped to the floor unconscious. The Nexus dimmed, its glow fading to a faint shimmer. Jeffrey staggered to his feet, his head pounding, his body shaking with exhaustion. But even as relief washed over him, a chill of uncertainty crept up his spine. He had won the battle for the Nexus, but the war Zarus had set in motion still loomed on the horizon. The seeds of discord had been planted, and rooting them out would be a far greater challenge. Jeffrey looked to his team, to the faces of the humans and Nasat he had fought beside. If they were to have any hope of preserving the Alliance, of preventing the conflict Zarus had engineered, they would need to stand together like never before. The Nexus hummed softly in Jeffrey's hand, a reminder of the power and peril that now rested on his shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers both known and unseen. Inside the Nexus, Jeffrey's consciousness hurtled through a maelstrom of disjointed images and sensations. Fragments of memories, both his own and others, whirled past in a dizzying kaleidoscope. He caught glimpses of alien landscapes, strange technologies, and the faces of friends and foes alike. Suddenly the chaotic vortex coalesced into a nightmarish scene. Towering figures of shadow and flame loomed over Jeffrey, their eyes blazing with malevolent intent. These were the manifestations of Zarus's malice, the dark impulses that had driven him to seek domination. The figures lashed out with tendrils of searing energy, seeking to ensnare and consume Jeffrey's mind. He dodged and wove, his mental defenses straining under the onslaught. But even as he fought, he sensed something else amidst the darkness, a multitude of trapped essences, the minds Zarus had subverted and enslaved. Among them, a familiar presence called out to Jeffrey. With a surge of recognition, he realized it was Korax, the Narsat warrior who had tested him in the training grounds. But Korax's essence was mired in shadows, his will shackled by Zarus's influence. Jeffrey focused his thoughts, projecting a beacon of clarity and freedom towards Korax. "Fight it," he urged. "You're stronger than his control." For a moment, Korax's essence flickered and dimmed. Then, with a burst of defiance, he shattered the chains that bound him. His mind surged free, a blazing spear of resistance. Together, Jeffrey and Korax rallied the other trapped wills, forming a united front against Zarus's Dark Legion. They clashed in a titanic battle of psychic energy, bolts of raw emotion and memory crashing against shields of iron resolve. As the battle raged, the swirling chaos of the Nexus began to shift and change. The disjointed fragments of thought and feeling started to align, forming a clearer picture. Jeffrey caught glimpses of Zarus's past, a young Narsat soldier betrayed by those he trusted, his ideals shattered by the cruelty of war. He saw the wounds that had festered in Zarus's soul, twisting him into the monster he had become. With sudden clarity, Jeffrey understood. The Nexus was not merely a tool of domination, but a conduit of empathy and understanding. To truly defeat Zarus, he would need to do more than simply overpower him. He would need to heal the scars that drove his hatred. Jeffrey reached out with his mind, not in attack but in compassion. He projected memories of his own struggles, his own pain and loss. He showed Zarus the bonds of camaraderie he had forged with the Narsat, the shared triumphs and sacrifices. "I understand your pain," Jeffrey whispered across the psychic void. "But this path leads only to more suffering. It's not too late to choose another way." Zarus's presence faltered, the iron certainty of his convictions wavering in the face of Jeffrey's empathy. The shadowy figures that embodied his malice began to dissipate, their hold on the Nexus weakening. Seizing the moment of vulnerability, Jeffrey and his allies surged forward in a final overwhelming push. They tore through the remnants of Zarus's psychic defenses, shattering his control over the Nexus and the minds he had enslaved. In the physical world, Zarus convulsed and collapsed, his eyes rolling back in his head as his mind reeled from the psychic backlash. Jeffrey, too, staggered as he emerged from the trance, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, Jeffrey knew that their work was far from over. The Nexus thrummed in his grasp, its power now a double-edged sword. They had to act quickly to undo the damage Zarus had wrought. Gathering his team, Jeffrey focused his will through the Nexus once more. But this time, instead of a targeted strike, he unleashed a wave of clarity and truth. It rippled out across the stars, touching the minds that had been twisted by Zarus's manipulations. Like a fog lifting, the seeds of discord and mistrust planted by the rogue Narsat commander dissolved. Leaders on both sides blinked as if waking from a long nightmare. The true nature of the conspiracy laid bare before them. In the days that followed, Jeffrey and his team were hailed as heroes by Narsat and human alike. The alliance, once teetering on the brink of collapse, emerged stronger than ever. A new era of cooperation and understanding seemed poised to dawn. But even as the celebrations swirled around him, Geoffrey found his thoughts turning inward. The Nexus had shown him the incredible potential of psychic connection, but also its terrifying risks. The power to bridge minds, to influence and reshape thought itself, was a heavy burden to bear. He knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. To ensure that the Nexus and its secrets were never again used for nefarious ends, Geoffrey would need to delve deeper into its mysteries. He would need to confront the fundamental questions it raised about free will, identity, and the nature of the mind. But more than that, he saw an opportunity, a chance to use this power not for control but for healing, to foster true empathy and understanding between all sentient species. It was a daunting task, one that would likely take a lifetime. But as Geoffrey looked out at the stars, he felt a flicker of hope. With the Nexus as his guide and the strength of the human and Nasat alliance at his back, anything was possible. In the weeks following the confrontation with Zarus, Geoffrey found himself thrust into a new role. The human and Nasat leadership, recognizing the pivotal part he had played in averting catastrophe, appointed him as a special liaison between their militaries. His mission, to oversee joint training programs and foster greater cooperation between the two species. Geoffrey threw himself into the task with characteristic dedication. He worked closely with Draco and Corax, the bonds forged in battle now tempered into a strong alliance. Together, they pored over combat data, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of human and Nasat tactics. They spent long hours in the training halls drilling integrated squads in new maneuvers that blended the lightning-fast strikes of human martial arts with the raw power and resilience of Nasat warriors. But Geoffrey's role extended beyond the training grounds. He found himself embarking on a series of diplomatic missions to other worlds, seeking to expand the alliance and promote peaceful coexistence. At every turn, he brought the Nexus, hoping to use its power to bridge the gaps in understanding that so often led to conflict. On a lush jungle planet orbiting a binary star, Geoffrey sat across from the chieftain of a fierce warrior race. For generations, these proud beings had resisted all attempts at contact, viewing outsiders as threats to their way of life. But as Geoffrey opened his mind through the Nexus, sharing visions of cooperation and mutual benefit, he saw the chieftain's stance begin to soften. "Perhaps," the alien leader said, his voice a deep rumble. "There is wisdom in your words, human. We have much to gain from trade and alliance, and much to lose from isolation." Geoffrey left that world with a new treaty in hand and a glimmer of hope in his heart. But even as he worked to build bridges between species, he found himself drawn ever deeper into the mysteries of the Nexus itself. Late at night, hunched over ancient texts and fragmentary records, Geoffrey delved into the artifact's origins. The more he learned, the more he grew convinced that the Nexus was far older and more powerful than anyone had suspected. Hints and whispers spoke of an ancient civilization that had wielded the Nexus to dominate entire star systems before vanishing into the mists of legend. And then the visions began. At first they were just flickers at the edge of his dreams, glimpses of towering spires under strange skies, of vast armies clashing on alien battlefields. But as the weeks passed, the visions grew more vivid, more insistent. Geoffrey saw worlds consumed by fire, entire species enslaved or exterminated by a shadowy force that pulsed with the Nexus's dark energy. He woke from these dreams in a cold sweat, the certainty growing in his gut that the ancient evil was stirring once again. The Nexus's reawakening had not gone unnoticed. Something out there had sensed its power and now sought to claim it for itself. Geoffrey knew he had to act, but he also knew he could not face this threat alone. He reached out to his closest allies, starting with Draco and Corax. In secure communications and clandestine meetings, he shared his fears and his evidence. To his relief, they did not dismiss his concerns. They had seen too much, been through too much together, to discount any threat, no matter how seemingly fantastic. Together, they began to assemble a covert task force, drawing from the most trusted and capable members of both the human and Nasat militaries. But Jeffrey knew they needed more than just soldiers. They needed knowledge, the kind of forbidden lore that could unravel the Nexus's deepest secrets. That was when he met Zara. She came to him in the depths of a Nasat archive, a lithe figure in a hooded robe. At first glance, she seemed no different from the dozens of other scholars and researchers Jeffrey had encountered in his quest for answers. But as she spoke, revealing tantalizing fragments of long-lost histories and ancient prophecies, Jeffrey realized that Zara was far more than she appeared. "The Nexus is a key," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A key to a door that should never be opened. But there are those who would turn that key, regardless of the consequences." Zara spoke of a cabal, a secret society that had existed for millennia with a single purpose: to harness the Nexus's power for their own ends. They believed that with the artifact under their control, they could dominate not just worlds, but the very fabric of reality itself. "They are everywhere," Zara warned. "In the highest echelons of your government and ours. They will stop at nothing to get what they want." Jeffrey felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known that the stakes were high, but the scope of the conspiracy Zara hinted at was staggering. If she was right, they were not just fighting an external threat, but a rot that had taken hold in the very heart of their societies. From that moment on, Jeffrey and his team worked with a renewed sense of urgency. They chased down every lead, followed every thread, no matter how seemingly insignificant. They met in secret, never knowing who they could trust, always looking over their shoulders for the knife in the dark. But even as they raced against time to unravel the Cabal's plans, Jeffrey felt the Nexus's pull growing stronger. In quiet moments, he found himself reaching for the artifact, drawn to its promise of power and understanding. Each time, he pulled back, afraid of what he might become if he surrendered to its seductive whisper. And yet a part of him wondered if that very power might be the key to stopping the Cabal and the ancient evil they sought to unleash. If he could master the Nexus, bend it to his will, perhaps he could use it to save everything he held dear. It was a dangerous thought, one that kept Jeffrey awake long into the night. He knew he was walking a razor's edge, balanced between salvation and damnation. One misstep, and he could fall, taking everything he fought for with him. But what choice did he have? The stakes were too high, the threat too grave. He had to press on no matter the cost to himself. And so as the shadows lengthened and the conspiracy tightened its grip, Jeffrey steeled himself for the battles to come. With the Nexus in his hand and his allies at his side, he would face whatever the future held. For the sake of his world, for the sake of all worlds, he had to. As Jeffrey pored over the ancient texts and data files, a chilling realization crept over him. The Nexus wasn't just an artifact. It was a living duality, a cosmic scale of balance between creation and destruction. And the ancient evil they had been fighting wasn't a separate force, but the Nexus's own dark shadow. He called an emergency meeting with his team. Zara, her eyes wide, confirmed his findings. The Nexus requires a group of psychic guardians to maintain its equilibrium. In ages past, these guardians were chosen from among the strongest and wisest of many species, but they were betrayed by one of their own, who sought to unleash the Nexus's full destructive potential. Draco slammed his fist on the table. "Then we have no choice. We must become the new guardians." Corax nodded grimly. "It won't be easy. The trials to prove our worthiness will push us to our limits, and forging the bond between us will require absolute trust and commitment." Jeffrey met each of their gazes in turn. "I won't lie, this will be the hardest thing we've ever done, but the alternative is unthinkable. We either balance the Nexus or the galaxy falls." Their resolve hardened. They began the preparations. But even as they trained and meditated, the Shadow's forces moved against them. Bombs rocked the city streets, sowing panic and chaos. Assassins struck at their allies, their friends, even their families. Corax, his face a mask of grief and rage, cradled the lifeless body of his mate. "They will pay for this," he growled, his voice low and deadly. The attacks escalated, the body count rising. The Cabal's agents seemed to be everywhere, their influence insidious and far-reaching. Jeffrey and his team found themselves fighting not just physical battles, but a war for the hearts and minds of the people. They countered the Shadow's lies with truth, exposed the Cabal's schemes, rallied the masses to stand against the darkness. All the while they pushed themselves through the grueling trials, forging their psychic bonds in the crucible of adversity. At last they stood before the Nexus, ready to claim their roles as its guardians, but the Shadow was there, waiting. Jeffrey stared into that dark cowl and saw his own face staring back, twisted by malice and hunger for power. "You cannot win," the Shadow gloated. "I have seen your future, Jeffrey. I am what you will become if you are strong enough to seize the power that is your birthright." Jeffrey felt the pull of the Nexus, the whispers of temptation. It would be so easy to give in, to let the power flow through him unchecked, but he thought of his team, his friends, all those counting on him. "No," he said, his voice ringing with clarity. "I choose balance, I choose the light." He reached out to his companions, felt their strength flowing into him even as his flowed into them. They were one, the Guardians, the light against the darkness. The Shadow screamed in rage and charged, the dark Nexus flaring. Jeffrey and his allies met the onslaught, their own Nexus powers blazing. The very fabric of reality trembled as the two forces clashed. They were evenly matched, neither able to gain ground. Jeffrey knew they needed to end this, to seal the breach the Shadow had torn between realities. With a thought, he and his team began to weave a construct of pure psychic energy, a cage to contain the darkness. But it wasn't enough. The construct needed an anchor, a living conduit to hold it in place, and in that instant Jeffrey understood what needed to be done. He looked to his team, saw the realization in their eyes, the unspoken goodbyes. Then, before they could stop him, he leapt forward, into the heart of the maelstrom, into the center of the construct. Pain, unlike anything he had ever known, ripped through him as he became the living anchor, his life force the key to sealing the rift. He felt himself fading, his consciousness unraveling. But through the agony he also felt a profound sense of peace. He had made his choice, and he knew it was the right one. As the light engulfed him, as the rift sealed and the Shadow's scream faded to nothing, Jeffrey's last thought was of his friends, his team. He had faith in them. They would carry on, the guardians of balance, the protectors of the realms. His story was ending, but theirs was just beginning. The Nexus pulsed one last time, then went still, its energies calm and steady. In the sudden silence, Draco, Corax, and Zara stood, their faces streaked with tears and sweat, their hearts heavy with loss and purpose. They had won, but the cost had been high, and they knew their journey was far from over, for as long as the Nexus existed, as long as there were those who would seek to misuse its power, the Guardians would be needed. They would be ready. For Jeffrey, for the galaxy, for the balance, they would stand now and always. The Shadow's dark construct collapsed, the twisted energies dissipating into the void, but even as relief washed over them, the Guardians knew their work was only beginning. The Nexus, though balanced for now, would always be a target for those seeking power. They would need to be vigilant, to train new Guardians, to ensure that the hard-won peace endured. Draco placed a hand on the Nexus, feeling its steady thrum. "We will tell his story," he said softly. "Jeffrey's sacrifice will not be forgotten." Zara nodded, her eyes distant. "And we will honor him by continuing his work, by being the guardians he believed we could be." Corax, his grief tempered by grim resolve, hefted his weapon. "Then let us begin. The galaxy needs us." They stood together, united by loss, by purpose, by the unbreakable bonds of their shared trials. The road ahead would be long and hard, but they would walk it together. For the fallen, for the future, they would stand as the guardians of the Nexus, the protectors of the light. Jeffrey's legacy would live on through them, a beacon of hope in an uncertain universe. As they turned to face the stars, ready to embrace their new roles, the Nexus pulsed in sync with their heartbeats, a silent promise, a solemn vow. The balance would be maintained, no matter the cost. For in the end, that was what it meant to be a guardian, to give everything, even life itself, for the sake of others. Jeffrey had shown them the way, and they would follow in his footsteps, now and always. The Nexus hummed a requiem and a rallying cry as the new guardians stepped forward to meet their destiny. In the heart of the psychic maelstrom, Jeffrey and his allies poured their power into the construct, straining to hold back the Shadow's onslaught. But the dark entity's strength seemed boundless, fueled by the twisted essence of the corrupted Nexus. Draco, his scales glistening with sweat, turned to Jeffrey. "It's not enough," he growled. "The construct needs an anchor, a living conduit to stabilize it." Jeffrey met his gaze, understanding dawning in his eyes. "No," he whispered. "There has to be another way." But Draco shook his head. "You know there isn't." He placed a clawed hand on Jeffrey's shoulder. "You're needed here to lead the Guardians and maintain the balance. This is my chance to atone for my past mistakes, to prove the worth of my people." Tears stung Jeffrey's eyes as he gripped Draco's arm. "I can't ask you to do this." Draco's fangs glinted in a sad smile. "You're not asking, I'm offering." With a final nod to his comrades, Draco stepped forward, his form beginning to glow with an inner light. He turned to face the Shadow, his voice ringing out over the chaos. "You've haunted us long enough. It's time to end this." Draco's body dissolved into pure energy, merging with the psychic construct. The barrier flared with newfound strength, pushing back against the Shadow's darkness. Jeffrey and the others channeled their power through Draco, focusing it into a searing lance of light. The Shadow recoiled, its form cracking and splintering under the onslaught. With a final defiant roar, it shattered into a million shards of darkness, scattered on the astral winds. The rift sealed with a blinding flash, the Nexus's energy stabilizing as the realm of thought and reality realigned. But as the light faded, Jeffrey and his allies found themselves alone. Draco was gone, his essence sacrificed to save them all. In the aftermath of the battle, they gathered in somber silence, their hearts heavy with grief and gratitude. Corax placed a hand on Jeffrey's shoulder, his voice rough with emotion. He made his choice, and in doing so he saved us all. His sacrifice will never be forgotten. Jeffrey nodded, blinking back tears. He was a true guardian until the end. As the weeks turned to months, Jeffrey threw himself into his new role as leader of the Guardians. He worked tirelessly to rebuild trust between the Nasat and humans, fostering cooperation and understanding where once there had been only suspicion and prejudice. He established a new order, dedicated to the study and protection of the Nexus. Under his guidance, a new generation of Guardians was trained, each carefully chosen for their strength of character and commitment to the greater good. Years passed, and Jeffrey's name became legend. To some, he was a savior, a beacon of hope in a troubled galaxy. To others, he was a figure of awe and fear, a wielder of unfathomable power. But to those who knew him best, he was a man haunted by loss, driven by a solemn duty to preserve the balance he had fought so hard to achieve. On a quiet day, Jeffrey found himself standing before a towering monument, a sleek spire of gleaming metal that rose from the heart of the Guardians' headquarters. Etched into its base were the names of those who had fallen in the battle against the Shadow, with Draco's name emblazoned at the center. Jeffrey placed his hand on the cool metal, his fingers tracing the grooves of his friend's name. "I miss you," he whispered, "every day." As he stood there, lost in memory, a flicker of unease brushed against his mind. A disturbance in the Nexus, a subtle ripple that hinted at challenges yet to come. Jeffrey closed his eyes, reaching out with his senses. The Nexus thrummed with energy, its power as vast and mysterious as ever. He knew that the balance he had fought so hard to maintain was fragile, always at risk from those who would seek to exploit it for their own gain. But as he turned to leave, a young Nasat approached him, her eyes wide with awe and determination. "Master Jeffrey," she said, bowing her head, "I wish to train under you, to learn the ways of the Guardians. Jeffrey regarded her, seeing in her the same spark of potential that had once driven him. In that moment he felt a flicker of hope, a chance to pass on the lessons he had learned and ensure that Draco's sacrifice had not been in vain. He placed a hand on the young Nasat's shoulder, a smile tugging at his lips. "What's your name, young one?" "Zasha, sir." "Well, Zasha," Jeffrey said, "let's begin. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.